Part 2. Grayhaven felt smaller and larger at the same time. Smaller because everything in my world had been condensed into a single point: him. Larger because suddenly the edges of my life stretched farther than I had ever dared to imagine, filled with questions I didn't know how to answer. Daniel was quiet the next morning, a trace of hesitation in his usual calm. When we met at low tide, the ease we had cultivated was fragile, as if the storm we'd crossed had left invisible cracks. "You're quiet," I said, stirring my coffee. The clink of the spoon against the mug sounded louder than usual. "I have things on my mind," he admitted. "Things I haven't shared." I studied him. His gaze was distant, but his hands wrapped around the mug with an almost desperate grip. I knew that look, the one that said he carried something heavy alone. "I can listen," I said softly. He swallowed. "It's about the past." I nodded. "Then start there." Daniel's past unfolded slowly. In fragments he seemed afraid to assemble into a complete story. He had grown up in a small coastal town several hundred miles south of Grayhaven. His father had been a fisherman and his mother a schoolteacher, steady, practical people who gave him the kind of love that was dependable but not emotional. It was the first time I realized that the man who seemed so guarded had learned early that feelings could be dangerous, that love could break you if you leaned too heavily on it. He spoke of a girlfriend from years ago, Anna, someone who had burned brightly and gone out quickly. He had loved her fiercely, he admitted, but also recklessly, leaving a trail of misunderstandings and mistakes. The memory lingered in his voice, not bitterness, but a quiet sorrow, as if a part of him still lived in that failure. "I lost her," he said, staring at the window, where the sea gleamed under a pale sun. I wanted to reach across the table, to take his hands in mine, but I waited. Let him decide if he wanted that kind of comfort. "And now?" I asked gently. "Now I try to be careful," he said, "careful enough to avoid repeating the past. But careful can be lonely." After that conversation, everything between us changed. The familiarity we had shared gained depth, weighted by the knowledge of what each of us carried. I became more aware of his silences, more attuned to the shifts in his expression. At the same time, I realized that my own fears, my broken marriage, my reluctance to trust, weren't just mine. They had traveled with me, settling into the spaces between us. One evening, he invited me to see the boat he had been repairing. "I want you to see it finished," he said. I followed him along the docks, the sky streaked with the muted colors of sunset. The smell of salt and varnish mingled, strong and intoxicating. The boat gleamed, polished and alive, a testament to care and patience. "It's beautiful," I said, brushing my fingers along the smooth wood. "It was broken," he said softly. "Not beyond repair, but I had to face it, piece by piece, before I could finish it." I nodded, feeling the parallel in my own life. That night, we stayed on the docks longer than we should have. The moon hung low, a silver disk over the water. The sound of waves hitting the pilings was hypnotic. We didn't speak much, just sat side by side, shoulders brushing, sharing warmth without words. When Daniel finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I want to tell you everything," he said, "but I'm scared it will change what we have." I turned to him. "You can't break what's already real by sharing it. You can only deepen it." He looked at me, eyes glimmering in moonlight, and for a long moment, I thought I would fall into him right there. Instead, he leaned closer, resting his forehead against mine. "Then I'll start," he said. He told me about his father, about the long hours on the water, about the night a storm took one of the boats and nearly took his father with it. He spoke of the fear that had never left him, the quiet ways he learned to cope with loss and uncertainty. He told me about Anna again, the mistakes he'd made, and the way he had failed to hold on to something precious. Each confession peeled back layers I had never suspected existed. And through it all, I listened. Not as a woman falling in love, though I was, but as someone understanding the shape of a man who had endured, survived, and still allowed himself to care. Afterwards, when the confessions ended, there was a silence deeper than any we had shared before. "Are you afraid of me now?" he asked, voice quiet. "No," I said immediately. "Afraid of what?" "Afraid that knowing me, really knowing me, will make you leave." I reached out, brushing my hand along his. "I don't leave what I choose," I said. "I've already chosen." His chest rose and fell rapidly, relief and something else mingling in his gaze. We leaned in, this time without hesitation. The kiss was different from before. Deeper, slower, more urgent, as if we were both desperate to anchor ourselves to each other after the storm of confessions. The days that followed were charged with a new intimacy. Every glance, every touch carried weight. Even when we were apart, the knowledge of each other's vulnerabilities lingered, shaping the way we moved through our small routines. Yet fear shadowed the edges. I was terrified of wanting him too much, afraid that if I let myself fall completely, the past, mine or his, could come back to claim us. Daniel, too, seemed to wrestle with his own fears. There were moments when he would retreat into quiet thought, his gaze distant, as if wrestling invisible ghosts. I wanted to reach out, to tell him that we could face them together, but the words never came out right. And so we danced around each other, fragile and aware, discovering love in the careful spaces between truth and fear. One evening, I found myself walking alone along the cliffs. The wind tugged at my coat, tossing my hair across my face. Below, the waves crashed against jagged rocks. I thought of Daniel, of the way his hand had fit in mine, of the softness in his voice when he shared the parts of himself no one else had seen. I realized something startling. I was no longer afraid of falling. I was afraid of the moment I might have to choose between protecting my heart and letting it break wide open. Love, I learned, was not about safety. It was about courage. The courage to be vulnerable when the world had taught you otherwise. And I was beginning to understand that Daniel had that same courage. Grayhaven had a way of hiding storms in plain sight. The sky was calm the morning it began, deceptively calm. The sun glinted off the harbor, seagulls wheeled overhead, and the scent of salt carried lazily on the wind. But beneath that serene surface, something had shifted, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. Daniel had been distant all week. Not absent exactly, but quieter, more reserved than usual. He laughed less, moved with an edge I couldn't place. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was imagining it, until he snapped. It happened at the cafe. We had met as usual, early, the smell of coffee and pastry wrapping around us. I had smiled, thinking the tension might lift today, that perhaps the previous week had been just a ripple. But the moment Daniel saw me, his jaw tightened. "Emma," he said, voice sharp, "we need to talk." I froze, my spoon halfway to my lips. "What about?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual, though my chest had tightened. He didn't answer immediately. He stared at me, searching, as if he were looking for permission to speak. Finally, he leaned forward. "I've been avoiding something I shouldn't have, and it's not fair to you." I waited, heart hammering. "I wasn't honest about Anna," he continued, and my stomach sank. "I haven't told you everything about her, about us, about why it ended." I swallowed, forcing myself to remain calm. "You told me before." "No, not everything," he said, voice rising slightly. "And it's not just her, it's me. I don't know how to love without breaking it. I don't know how to let someone in completely. And now I feel like I'm losing control." That night, the first real storm of the season broke over Grayhaven. Rain slammed against the windows of my apartment. Wind rattled the frames, and the ocean roared like it wanted to reclaim the town. I paced, restless, replaying every word Daniel had said. I didn't know if I should be angry, scared, or grateful. Grateful that he trusted me enough to tell me. Grateful and terrified all at once. When he arrived hours later, I didn't even realize I had been holding my breath. He stood in the doorway, drenched, hair plastered to his forehead, eyes wild and dark. "Emma," he said, voice raw, "I can't hide it anymore. I can't pretend I'm okay. I can't pretend I'm not scared. Scared of hurting you, scared of loving you too much, scared that one day you'll leave." I stepped forward, my hands trembling. "You don't have to pretend anything with me." He shook his head, despair and longing battling across his face. "I do, because if I don't, I'll ruin this. I'll ruin you." "Daniel," I whispered. Before I could stop myself, he pulled me into his arms. The kiss that followed was fierce, urgent, a collision of months of restraint, fear, and desire. The storm outside seemed to echo it, thunder rolling as our lips met, hands gripping, bodies pressing together. For the first time, everything we had held back poured out. I clung to him, feeling the heat, the pulse of life and fear and longing all at once. We broke apart only for air, gasping, soaked from the rain we had tracked inside. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted, forehead resting against mine. "I don't know how to be someone who can love without fear." I brushed rain from his cheek. "Then don't. Just be you. That's enough." He looked at me, eyes fierce and vulnerable. "Enough? For you?" "I think so. I know so." And in that moment, the storm outside became a background hum, nothing compared to the hurricane we had become together. The days that followed were electric. We moved past hesitation. Every touch carried weight. Every glance was laden with meaning. Grayhaven itself seemed to bend around us, accommodating the storm that now existed in our hearts. But storms are not easily tamed. Arguments erupted, sudden, sharp, unexpected. One afternoon, I accused him of holding back too much. "You think you're protecting me," I said, "but all you're doing is building walls." He snapped. "And what would you have me do, Emma? Throw myself recklessly into something I can't control? Into something I've already broken before?" "I want you," I said, voice trembling. "I don't care about the past. I don't care about mistakes. I want you, all of you." He stared at me, and I thought for a moment he might leave. Then he did something I hadn't expected. He kissed me, slow and consuming, as if trying to erase all fear with one motion. That night, we stood on the cliffs, the ocean thrashing below. The wind tore at our clothes, tossed my hair around my face. I gripped his hand, holding on as tightly as I dared. "I can't promise it'll be easy," he said. "But I can promise I'll try, and I can promise I won't let go unless you want me to." "I won't," I said. We kissed again, the world disappearing, leaving only the two of us and the wind and the water, wild and free. It was the first time I understood fully that love was not gentle. Love was a storm, and sometimes, to survive it, you had to let yourself be drenched, battered, and consumed. The storm passed by morning. Grayhaven emerged wet, streets glistening, harbor shining with a reluctant calm. Daniel and I walked along the pier, side by side, silent but together. The air smelled of salt and earth, fresh and raw. I knew, as we walked, that nothing would ever be the same. We had faced our first real storm. Not the weather, not the past, but the collision of hearts that had learned too late that love was never quiet. And we had survived. But I also knew, deep down, that storms in Grayhaven were never over. There would be more, harder, fiercer, and I would have to choose, every time, to face them, with him or alone. After the storm, Grayhaven seemed almost serene. The streets glistened under the soft sunlight, the harbor sparkled like polished glass, and yet Something had shifted between Daniel and me. We had survived the first collision of our emotions, but survival did not mean clarity. Love, I learned, could be as heavy as it was thrilling. It began subtly. Daniel became quieter again, though not in anger this time. He was distant in a way I couldn't reach, staring at the horizon for longer than usual, answering my questions with a nod rather than words, retreating into the rhythm of his work on the boats. I tried not to notice. I told myself he was processing, that his past haunted him still. But the absence, however gentle, began to sting. One evening, I arrived at his workshop unannounced. "Daniel?" I called softly. No reply. I stepped inside, the smell of varnish and oil familiar, comforting. And then I found him, hunched over a partially disassembled boat, his back stiff. "I've been trying to fix it," he muttered without looking up. "Fix what?" I asked, stepping closer. "Everything," he said, finally meeting my gaze. His eyes were stormy, restless. "My life, my mistakes, this, us." I hesitated. "You can't fix us by retreating." "I know," he said, "but it's all I know how to do." And just like that, I felt the familiar fear creep back, the fear of losing him, not to another person, but to himself. Over the next weeks, we found a fragile rhythm. We argued and reconciled, we hurt and healed. Grayhaven became a silent witness to our growth. The harbor held our laughter, the cliffs absorbed our tears, the streets knew when we passed, side by side, tentative yet committed. I discovered that courage isn't a single act, it's 1,000 small decisions every day to stay, to trust, to love. Daniel learned, slowly, that letting someone in doesn't guarantee destruction, that love, even with its risks, is worth the vulnerability. And I learned that even after storms, even after distance and fear, the heart can expand to hold another fully, if you allow it. One night, as we sat together in my small apartment, watching the moonlight spill across the floor, Daniel turned to me. "Emma," he said softly, "thank you for staying, for believing in me." I smiled, brushing my fingers through his damp hair. "I didn't believe in you. I believed in us." His eyes glimmered, emotion raw and unguarded. "Us," he repeated. I like the sound of that. And for the first time in weeks, I felt the tension between us ease, replaced with quiet certainty. We didn't know what the future held. Storms would come again, past ghosts would reappear, fears would rise. But for now, in the soft glow of Grayhaven's night, we had chosen each other. And that was enough. Grayhaven in late autumn has a quiet melancholy about it. The cliffs are streaked with fog. The harbor whispers instead of roaring, and the wind carries a chill that seems to settle inside your bones. I walked its streets alone more often than not during those weeks, though Daniel and I still met, still shared coffee, still lingered by the water. But the difference now was subtle. We were learning to stand on our own, even as we chose each other. It began with small things. I took long walks along the pier at dawn, letting the salty breeze wake every part of me that had been dormant for too long. I began to write again, words spilling onto paper with a freedom I hadn't felt since my marriage ended. I organized my apartment, cleared closets, donated clothes I hadn't worn in years. Every action felt like reclaiming myself, not for him, not for Grayhaven, not for anyone but me. Daniel noticed. "You look different," he said one morning, standing beside me as the sun rose over the water. "Stronger, lighter." "I'm just trying not to get lost in everything else," I replied, brushing my fingers through the railings of the pier. He smiled, eyes soft but pensive. I should do the same. And so he did. He started spending more time at the boatyard, fully alone, restoring old vessels not because they were urgent, but because the act itself grounded him. I saw him transform, his shoulders straightening, the tension in his jaw easing. The man who had been haunted by the past began to emerge, quiet, steadfast, attentive. We began to speak more openly about our fears, the subtle ones that had almost undone us before. "I still worry," he admitted one evening as we walked along the cliffs, the waves below reflecting the moonlight. "Not about us, exactly. About what the world will do to us if we aren't careful. About the parts of me I haven't fixed yet." "You're human," I said, smiling softly. "You'll always have unfinished parts. But I want you anyway, parts included." He laughed lightly, a sound that felt like home. "You're brave." "No," I said. "I'm just learning not to run." There were still moments of tension. Old fears never disappeared completely. I caught myself imagining him leaving, imagining storms that hadn't come, imagining ghosts from his past and my own colliding with us. And Daniel, too, sometimes retreated into silence, wrestling with shadows that only he could confront. But the difference now was the way we handled it. We talked, we admitted weakness, we held space for one another. The fire of emotion still burned, but it no longer threatened to consume us entirely. It was a deeper love, one forged in patience and understanding rather than just longing and passion. One afternoon, I joined him at the boatyard. He was bent over a vessel, sanding the wood with methodical care. The sun gleamed through the clouds, casting his figure in gold. "I've made a lot of progress," I said, admiration in my voice. He straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. "Not as much as I'd like. Perfection isn't the goal, completion is." He looked at me, a slow, thoughtful smile spreading across his face. "You sound like someone who's learned a lot about herself." "I have," I admitted, "about myself, about what I want, about what matters. And you?" He exhaled, leaning against the side of the boat. "I'm learning the same. That loving someone isn't about possession, it's about presence, choosing each other every day, even when it's hard." I stepped closer, touching the wood near his hand. "Then we're both learning." He nodded, eyes softening. "Together and alone, both." The nights became a sanctuary. We'd sit by the fireplace in my small apartment, sometimes talking, sometimes silent. The comfort we shared was no longer fueled only by desire, but by understanding, trust, and quiet affection. One night, he held my hand as we watched the moonlight shimmer across the harbor. "Do you ever think about the past?" I asked. "All the time," he admitted, "but I don't dwell. I use it to guide me, to make me better, to love better." I leaned against him, feeling warmth spread from our connected hands up through my chest. "I want to use it the same way." "You do," he said, voice low, "every day." And in that moment, I understood. The strength of love is not just in passion or closeness, it's in the ability to face your own fears alone and still choose to come back to each other. I also began to notice how Grayhaven had become a reflection of us. The town's foggy mornings mirrored our quiet reflection, the cliffs mirrored our vulnerability, the harbor mirrored our resilience. Every step I took through its streets was a reminder that love, like life, was not about avoiding storms, but navigating them with courage. Daniel and I often spoke of the future, not plans exactly, but possibilities. "I want to keep this," he said one morning as we watched a boat drift lazily in the harbor. "Not just the love, but the peace, the trust, the way we've grown. I want to keep us intact." "I do too," I said, squeezing his hand, "but it has to be earned every day, not assumed." He nodded. "Every day. I can live with that." There were moments of tenderness I had never anticipated. We discovered small rituals, morning coffee at the cafe before anyone else arrived, brushing sand from each other's shoes after walks along the beach, leaving notes in each other's pockets or books when one of us was gone. These gestures were simple, but they carried weight, A promise, a quiet acknowledgement that we were still present for each other even when apart. One evening, we walked along the cliffs after a rainstorm. The wind had cleaned the air, leaving everything crisp and bright under a sky streaked with gold. Daniel stopped and looked at me. "I want to tell you something," he said. "I already do every day," I said. "No," he said, smiling faintly. "This is different. I want to tell you that I'm not afraid anymore. Not of loving you, not of facing my past, not of storms or distance or anything else. Because I know that whatever comes, we'll face it together." I felt tears rise in my eyes. "I feel the same way." He brushed a damp strand of hair from my face, his hand lingering. "Then we're ready," he said. I nodded, the wind whipping around us, carrying away doubts, fears, and hesitations. Ready for anything. Grayhaven became more than a refuge. It became a witness to our growth, a reminder that love isn't just about passion or desire, but about endurance, self-discovery, and choosing each other in the quiet moments when no one is watching. I began to understand fully that the love we had built was strong, not because it had been easy, but because it had been tested, because we had learned to be whole alone and together. And as I watched Daniel standing beside me, the sunset reflecting in his eyes, I realized this was the first time in my life I felt entirely safe with someone, not sheltered or protected, but truly understood and seen. And that, I understood, was the truest form of intimacy. Grayhaven was quiet that morning, almost serene, the kind of calm that followed a storm but carried its memory in every ripple across the harbor. Daniel and I had spent the night discussing everything we had avoided for weeks: fears, doubts, past mistakes, and desires. By the time dawn broke, something had shifted. We were no longer tentative, no longer afraid of the storms inside or outside ourselves. The first light caught his face as he stood beside me on the pier. He looked at me, eyes filled with a mixture of longing, relief, and determination. "Emma," he said softly, "I want to live without hiding, without fear. I want us fully. No more pauses, no more retreating." I smiled, my chest tight with emotion. "I want the same, fully, with all of it. The storms, the quiet, the chaos, everything." He took my hands, holding them as if anchoring both of us. "Then let's promise," he said. "Whatever comes, we face it together. No secrets, no distance, no running." I nodded, tears brimming. "I promise." The day moved slowly, deliberately, as if Grayhaven itself was celebrating our choice. We walked the cliffs, the wind tossing our hair, the ocean raging below in playful rebellion. Our laughter echoed, untethered from old fears. We spoke of nothing and everything, dreams, memories, fleeting thoughts, and found joy in simply being present with one another. When he pulled me close on the cliffs, the sun glinting off the water behind him, it wasn't a kiss of tentative longing. It was fierce, complete, a merging of hearts that had endured storms and shadows alike. Every hesitation melted into the waves crashing below. Every fear dissolved in the salt-laden wind. Evenings became a sacred ritual. We returned to the boatyard together, restoring not just vessels, but each other's spirits. Daniel worked with a focus I had never seen before. Hands steady, mind present, heart open. I watched him and realized he was no longer haunted by the past. Not completely, but he had learned to carry it without letting it consume him. I, too, had transformed. I wrote, I explored, I reclaimed every part of myself I had hidden or lost. And through it all, we were together, not because it was easy, but because it was real. Then came the final challenge, the test of fire. A letter arrived, a reminder of unresolved debts from Daniel's past, demanding attention and threatening to pull him back into uncertainty. My first instinct was fear that history would repeat itself, that shadows would claim him, or that I would lose him to circumstances beyond our control. But instead of panic, Daniel turned to me. "Emma," he said, voice steady, "we've faced storms before. This is just another one. I won't let it define us, and I won't let it drive us apart. Will you face it with me?" I took his hands, warmth spreading through me. Every step, together. And so we did. Days later, the debts were settled, the ghosts confronted. We emerged not unscathed, no one is unscathed in life, but stronger, grounded in a love that had been tested, strained, and ultimately forged in fire. That night, we stood on the cliffs again. The moon painted the ocean silver, waves whispering secrets only we could hear. Daniel brushed a wet strand of hair from my face and smiled. "Do you feel it?" he asked. "I do," I said. "Everything feels ours, safe, alive, real." He kissed me softly at first, then more insistently, and I felt it, the culmination of months of longing, restraint, fear, and courage. This was no longer about passion alone, it was about trust, intimacy, and the choice to remain fully with each other. Grayhaven watched us that night, a silent witness to the love that had endured storms, both literal and emotional. We walked through the streets hand in hand, the harbor reflecting our intertwined shadows. We shared whispers, laughter, and quiet glances, each a promise that the past no longer held sway over our present or future. In the warmth of my small apartment, with the fire casting flickering light over our entwined forms, Daniel whispered, "I choose you every day." "And I choose you," I replied, voice trembling with certainty. And that was the truth. Love was not easy, not predictable, not quiet. It was the tides and the wind, the storms and the calm, the moments of fear and the choices that overcame them. It was choosing someone fully, knowing the risks, knowing the storms, and deciding to stay anyway. We had learned to be whole alone and together. And finally, we were ready.